We will now hear from Mark about his joint work with Daniel Braby about references to constituents in PMQs.
We are, our paper is bringing in the constituents, the role of incentives and institutional constraints in driving constituency focus in PMQs. And this is a paper I did with Daniel, who's here as well, and you can chip in and help with the questions. So the PMQs is the most prominent procedure, which out of all the procedures that take place in Parliament, and Hansard's done a lot of research on this. So it's an interesting one to pick. It also provides some recent interesting work by Convery and Park. I think, David, you're here, and which shows that it's not just a waste of space and puerile, that people actually do learn things from it. And they've got an interesting piece of research out this year which provides some evidence of that. We also know that politicians representing constituencies spend more time doing constituency work, and we've got a constituency-based system. So, you know, this is quite an interesting, it being high profile plus the electoral system makes this an interesting thing to look at constituency behaviour. And it's also one of the most obvious procedures to search for evidence of the personal vote in a legislature. However, it's a rare event, so we can't really go in and look at, analyse individual MPs. The modal number of contributions is 13, and it is heavily skewed towards the lower end of the lower N. You know, you have to put your name in for a ballot. You don't, and there's 650 MPs and only so much time with this procedure. 30 minutes, or increasing during Burko's time a little bit longer. So what we're doing is we're measuring patterns in the data over time and across all contributions. And we've got numerous time periods, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So hopefully with a lot of research that has been done on PMQs before has focused on a smaller number of PMQs. We're trying to extend that and increase the external validity by adding more cases. The trends in constituency focus over time, you might have seen Daniel had tweeted this one the other day, it got some kind of traction. And you'll see that over time, the percentage of contributions during PMQs that refer to the constituency has gone up over time. And you can really see some outliers here. 1992 is an outlier, a start of an election. You know, it's just post-election, and then we can really see the biggest outlier there is 2020, where people are referring to their constituencies a lot more during PMQs, and that's possibly people reacting to, without going into the context, it's the content. It's look, people are referring more to their constituencies, and people may be affected by COVID and business shutdown and so on.
Just to note very quickly, this is across all spoken contributions in the House of Commons. This is the broad trend. This isn't limited to PMQs. Oh,
sorry, Dan. So that is a broad trend across all procedures. So, sorry, not just PMQs. If we look at the literature, so governing party MPs, Parker's done some interesting work that opposition members and party leaders are more likely to ask questions. And these questions are likely to have a negative flavour. So getting rid of the government is more important than courting the personal vote. Governing party MPs are more likely, in the converse, to want to support the government, particularly if they want to make use of career advancement and ministerial positionings. And if we look at the work done by the House of Commons on the roles of MPs, we can see the first one that they list is the role of supporting your own party, and this we see as is prominent with governing party MPs. So if you read through any transcripts, you'll often see some kind of softball questions from government, not all of them, but from government backbench MPs. And one way of doing a softball question is to ask the Prime Minister if they're next in town, could they please visit X hospital to see all the wonderful investment we're putting in, all that kind of stuff. Here's an example I pulled out recently from a few days ago. So Robin Miller, the people of Aberconwy would like to, does he agree that this vaccine gives real hope for a better 2021? What a question to receive. Yes, indeed, says the Prime Minister. He didn't just say yes, indeed. He did add a few more words as well. Thinking about opposition MPs, they're more likely to use PMQs. Mia emphasising what Mia had said earlier, that there are issues that you own and you're more likely to raise those issues and try and cause discomfort. And Bevan and John find evidence of this. We also, if we think about the role of the opposition, is to provide an alternative government. VO Key's done some work on this, as have Turner and Punnett. And it's about providing this alternative government, an alternative policy. So the key to that is not about necessarily representing the constituency, although you can try and fulfill both functions at the same time in very cleverly worded questions, and there is evidence that this has increased over time. But your prime focus is really is focusing in on the policy and trying to get that message across. We published some research earlier this year that looked at the leaders lamenting the rise in point scoring nature of PMQs, and Waddle, I think, who's here today as well, has also found that there's been an increase in verbal attacks from the Prime Minister to the Leader of the Opposition, and also from the Leader of the Opposition to the Prime Minister. And it's got some interesting examples in that particular research. So incentives to derail the PM, they've also arguably increased post-televisation, but there are these institutional constraints that steer opposition MPs away from constituency representation and more towards the focus on policy. So we've got two main hypotheses, that incentives to support party mean that government backbenchers are more likely to frame their questions using their constituencies. And conversely, institutional constraints and incentives, particularly for senior opposition politicians, means that they will be least likely to address their constituencies in questions. They are trying to get into office, and that's what the focus of their questions will be like. We know that other variables of salience that have been found in the literature, we're also going to throw those into the model. So sex, Lewandowski has done some interesting work here, and the idea here that female MPs are likely to steer clear of this yaboo politics and rowdy behaviour. And one way that that manifests itself is in talking about policy or talking about constituents and not engaging in that punch throwing. Marginality is also important here. Politicians are motivated by re-election. We know this from Mayhew's work, and those in the most marginal seats we would expect to mention the constituencies most, because they're trying to court that favour and try and get re-elected. They're most likely to get thrown out, so they're going to engage in that kind of behaviour. We also know that election proximity might be an important variable. So the closer we are to an election, the more likely you are to respond to the constituents, because the choice is closer within their hands. And there is numerous research in this area, and that is just a small selection of it in the slide. Another point that's quite interesting is that newly elected MPs, there was some interesting work on the role of newly elected MPs by Rush and Giddings. And in there, they talked about newly elected MPs, one of the very first things that they notice they've got to do is represent their constituents. There's an interesting little example in that book where one of the newly elected MPs goes to bed and says, I went to bed at 6 a.m. and at 7:30 the phone rang and it was a constituent wanting me to do something. So, and then there's this idea that they've got to nurse that constituency because they're new in the role and they need to talk about it. So we might expect newly elected MPs to talk a little bit more about their constituency than those people who've been in the post a long time. Data for this were taken from Evan Odell's Hansard speeches from 1979 to 2020. And our primary analysis here, we focus on the 2005 to 2015 time period, because these are two 5-year periods, but we do have data up to 2020. But we decided in this presentation just to present the data between 2005 to 2010 and 2010 to 2015, because we are dealing with parliaments that weren't derailed by Brexit, which might have altered how people behaved when they were putting questions to the Prime Minister, and also the topic and content and everything else. We've taken out the by-elections because they produce reactive results and they come in and they don't coincide with the full session, so they mess with the data. And we've taken out the opening questions, which are literally just asking the Prime Minister to list their engagements. Invariably, there's occasionally the odd one that is different to that. Constituency focus is measured by whether or not an MP's speaking intervention makes explicit reference to their constituency. So here we're looking at the reference to the constituency name or reference to individuals and groups identified as constituents. And the way we do this, building on Mackay's work, is to look at my constituent, all variants of that, and my own constituent, which could be constituents, constituent, constituency. We're also looking at references to the full constituency name, and then we're also looking at partial names. So the way we extracted the data, we could get a positive if they mentioned Chesham or Amersham. So they didn't have to mention both of them. So we've got the partial and we've got the full that we extracted from this data. The data analysis, 2005 to 2015, there were 316 Prime Minister's questions sessions, 159 in the first one, 157 in the second, 14,426 questions. So roughly parable, but the 2010 to 2015 PMQs are longer in nature because Berko had a tradition of letting the procedure roll for up to 45 minutes rather than 30 minutes, and it often did. The dependent variable we've got here is constituency reference. Did you reference the constituency, yes or no, as per the last slide's measurement? Independent variables, are you in the governing party, yes or no? Seniority, opposition only, yes or no? And we control for marginality. So did you barely win your seat, which would be close to 0, or did you completely win your seat, which would be hypothetical 100%? We looked at female was coded 1, here male 0, newly elected, yes or no, tenure was in years, and distance to election was in months. We ran 6 logic regression models for, we have one set of models that includes government and non-government MPs, and then we have one set of models that includes only non-government MPs. So this was the model, these are the results, and the key points. If you want the stats, you can look on the right. If that's making you heave, you can look on, sorry, this is being taped, isn't it? Sorry. You can look on the left. So the key points, you're more likely to mention the constituency. Government MPs are more than 2 times likely to mention the constituency. So what we're presenting there in the table, there are odds ratios, and all the variables are significant. You're more than 2 times likely if you're a government MP to mention the constituency. Female MPs, it's about 50% more. If we look at that final column, and then there's not much variance in the other 2 columns, which are data for the entire 2005 to 2010 and 2010 to 2015. And then the final column is both of the whole time period. You're less likely to mention constituency the longer you've been in office. So we can see there that tenure, 0.977, 2.3 multiplied by 10 years, that's in units of years. You're 23% less likely to mention the constituency if you've been in office 10 years. And marginality, you're 10%, you're 25% less likely with a 10% margin. So marginality, the bigger your margin, the less likely you are to feel like you have to raise the constituency. That kind of fits with what we would expect. That's including, you'll notice here that what we're also doing is we're looking at a time period where the Labour Party were in power 2005 to 2010, and then a period where there was coalition government 2010 to 2015. So we're trying to see if this model holds across different government arrangements, as well as looking at the effect across the 2, which is why we've disaggregated the 2. And then I'm trying to find the next model key points. You're less likely to mention the constituency. So here we're now just looking at non-government MPs. So we've taken out government MPs, and you're less, and we're bringing in the variable of seniority, and you're less likely to mention the constituency if you're a senior opposition MP. And this holds in whether it's a Labour government or whether it's a coalition government. You're more likely to mention the constituency female MPs. You'll notice here that gender, the odds ratio goes one way in 2005, one way in 2010. Now we're just looking at non-government MPs. So for female MPs, you're more likely to mention the constituency in 2010, but not in 2005. And then you're more likely to mention the constituency for new MPs in 2010. So there is a bit of sifting out here, depending upon the context or the election period that we're looking at. And then there's also a greater effect of marginality for non-government MPs. The thinking about the distance to election, this was kind of a visual we thought would show this better than the table, because the variable in the table doesn't really look at what's going on. If we plot what's going on, there's actually a curvy linear, which is the red line relationship. So you've got the percent of contributions with the constituency reference on the y-axis, and then across the x-axis is the percentage of constituency references by distance to the election. So on the far left, the distance to election is very close, and on the far right is that you're immediately after an election and you've got a long period to go. So there's often a lot of constituency mentions at the beginning of a session, which is that curve on the right, and there's some outlier cases there, and then there are some outlier cases, strong outlier cases, and a curve on the left for when you're very close to an election. So it looks like at the very beginning and at the very end, we tend to see a rise in these kind of things.
Can you please come to the conclusion?
Yeah, we're nearly there, sorry. Real quick, just in terms of the hypothesis one, just to conclude, government MPs are 2 times more likely than opposition MPs to raise constituency questions, and then backbenchers are almost 2 times, senior opposition, the frontbenchers, are almost 2 times less likely than backbenchers to raise constituency questions. And then the conclusion, we confirm previous findings in the literature that gender, seniority, tenure and marginality have significant effects on constituency focus. These trends apply to PMQs. I think what we're trying to add to this literature, as well as the variables that are in the literature, we're arguing that government party matters, the incentive to support party and be constituency focused, and that senior opposition politicians, if we think about the role of opposition and senior politicians, they are constrained and they won't be engaging in constituency mentions as much, and that the effects of these variables that we're focusing on in this data, they don't vary, unlike most of the other independent variables across the time period. So that we think this finding is quite an interesting one. We're interested to hear what you think about that. So thank you very much.